My name is Rolake Akinkugbe Filani, and I currently live and work in Nigeria. I moved back here about 7 years ago after living in the UK for almost 2 decades. I currently work in infrastructure and housing development. My background is in the energy sector, energy and infrastructure specifically. Over the last decade, I spent quite a lot of time working in financial services, investment banking, and development finance, helping to scale businesses in the energy and infrastructure space. That's something I'm really passionate about, and also generally passionate about infrastructure solutions for underserved communities. In terms of my interests and passions, I'm very multifaceted. I do quite a bit of nonprofit work. Recently, I was appointed to the global board of Save the Children International. Prior to that, I sat on the board of a local NGO here in Nigeria called Bethesda Child Support Agency. I'm also an executive communications coach, so I teach public speaking and presentation skills. Very passionate about mentoring young women. I led the development of the first private sector gender equity and equality scorecard whilst I chaired the private sector advocacy committee of WIMBIZ, which is Nigeria's largest women's nonprofit and network. I'm really, really big on promoting the advancement of women in leadership positions, and it's a great pleasure to join this call. What sort of keeps me awake at night is sustainable development. Building sustainable communities, building sustainable infrastructure. And I think no nation can really expect to make any economic headway without the full participation and inclusion of women in every facet of life, whether the public or the private sector. So I think I was trying to figure out how to maybe broach this. And I think the context I wanted to start with was in line with the theme of International Women's Month, day, year, whatever it is. It's a forever battle. So it's International Women's Every Day. That's what I want to call it. And the question for me is, what biases did I need to break on my leadership journey? And there are three ways of looking at those biases. So the first one is the biases I had against myself about my own leadership ability and what I could do. The second was the biases I had against what the role of other women should be, or the biases other women had about me. And then the third part of it is society as a whole, existing societal culture, corporate culture, particularly where I live. And so if I start with my leadership journey insofar as my own unconscious bias around my ability, I think the light bulb moment about my leadership potential came maybe about 10, 11 years ago. I'd held a couple of roles coming out of university. You know, I was always quite outspoken. I remember having very heated debates with my parents as a young child in the living room, you know, over watching a political program or a debate. And, you know, somebody would say, well, like, hey, you talk so much, you talk a lot. But one of the things that really helped me visualize myself as a person of influence and significance was, I remember this particular day, I was quite young, maybe about 10, 11. This was around the time CNN had just really become a thing. And I was watching TV, and I think Christiane Amanpour, she's been on TV for quite a long time. I'm sure we all know who she is. And my parents were there, my dad was there. And my dad said something to me. He said, Rolake, you know what? You could be a Christiane Amanpour one day. Or he just compared me to her. And that kind of switched on something in my mind, because it gave me the sheer audacity to think big. At that point, I said to myself, if this man who's loved and nurtured me all my life thinks that I'm good enough to be on the world stage, and he's actually voiced it and he said it, it means, well, guess what? I must be good enough to be on the world stage. And it was that kind of mentality and mindset that I kind of took into every facet of my life. So even after coming to the UK as a teenager, for me, it was like, there's nothing that I wouldn't set my hand to that I wouldn't do. And it was one of those things where I recognized that I had specific strengths, and very early on, because of my upbringing. And I want to emphasize this so much because now as a parent, I'm very conscious about it, particularly regards my daughter, in regards to my sons, is to instill the belief that leadership is gender agnostic, right? There is no reason why, if you're in a group, young children playing in the playground, it doesn't always have to be the boy that becomes the captain or becomes the class captain. And it was because of the consciousness of my upbringing, and it was validation that set me up for life. And this is a really important point, especially the roles of fathers and their daughters. But the same applies with their sons, teaching the sons to see and accept that in any kind of setting, anybody can be a leader, so long as they have the competence, they have the skills, they have the willingness, and they have the mindset. So that was great for me. So I think the challenge for me then became, having recognized that I had potential in whatever role I was, how do I ensure that my leadership is effective? And I remember my mom used to say something, that power without control is dangerous. So I think the problem for me was not the acceptance of myself as a leader, but the adaptive nature of my leadership. So how do I lead in specific contexts? And one of the things that I think really became very interesting for me is I worked in an organization in the UK after university that had a relatively flat, non-hierarchical structure. And because I had seen things back home in Nigeria, I was quite surprised at the way different genders would respond to each other in a leadership context. And I think competence was key, the ability to have and demonstrate qualities like emotional intelligence. And having exposure in those environments was really key, because then it gives you more confidence to vie for the next thing and to vie for the next role. There was a phase in my life where, despite all this amazing validation I had received and the fact that I got opportunities, I always put my best foot forward. I wouldn't say I was gender blind or blind to the fact that I was a woman, and that came with certain issues. Because I also think, telling people to not see gender is actually dangerous. The same way you tell people to be colorblind, I don't think you can be gender blind, because if you say we're going to be gender blind in terms of leadership, you miss an opportunity to make a difference, and you can actually ignore prejudice when it's going on. And for me, leadership was always about influence, but leadership is also adaptive. And I think a lot of the mistake we make as women, because people always say women are emotional, they're quite nurturing, they're this, we also forget that leadership is adaptive. It really depends on the context. And having enough self-awareness, which is another thing that I really, really developed, having enough self-awareness to recognize a situation for what it is. So if you're in a room, in a meeting, in a boardroom, you're sitting around the table, you're with another woman, the woman has said something, people are ignoring her, a man has said it, and people are applauding him. It is for you as a woman in a position of leadership to amplify the voice of that other woman. And that was, and I think the leadership plus the self-awareness, I think, is what many female leaders, we need to cultivate that. It is not just having the power, it's about the self-awareness that is required to make a difference in a specific situation. And that is really what change makers is being a change maker is all about. I think the other part I wanted to talk about was really about how we lead with other women. And I think my leadership journey has always been, I'm looking to make another woman better. Any opportunity I have to promote and champion a woman, I will always do so. And I'm not ashamed to say that if I have two candidates I'm considering for a position and they're both equally qualified, I am likely probably to want to hire the woman, so long as I believe she's competent. And that is part of my leadership consciousness that I've imbibed along the way. But I will never, ever compromise competence because of gender. The final point I want to make around the leadership journey insofar as society is concerned, the reality is that we need a critical mass. We need a critical mass of change. I was at an event today where people were talking about the fact that we celebrate International Women's Day all the time. Nothing has happened year in and year out. Another slogan, another gesture. Where are we? You saw what happened in the Nigerian National Assembly, right? You saw what happened in the Nigerian National Assembly, where a group of legislators in an assembly that's 95% men refused. I mean, they've done a U-turn now, but they refused to pass some constitutional amendments that would increase female representation, that would also allow a Nigerian woman with a foreign husband, allow that foreign husband to become a Nigerian citizen and be naturalized. Whereas there is a law that allows Nigerian men who marry foreign women, for those foreign women to become naturalized citizens. And they refused those amendments. But guess what? The women got together, they protested, they went to Abuja, they went to the National Assembly, and literally within 48, 72 hours, there was a U-turn. The jury is still out on whether it was because of the euphoria of IWD that they felt they would just do that gesture. Time will tell in a few weeks as to whether those amendments will sail. But what am I saying? That leadership, insofar as women in society are concerned, is that we need to come together. We need to build a critical mass. It is extremely difficult to legislate culture. It is extremely difficult to police culture. So it is an uphill task. And I'm speaking specifically in the context of Nigeria. I think wrapping all of this overall is individual responsibility amongst us women as leaders. We need to lean in. Sheryl Sandberg has said it. She said it over many years. We need to lean in. We need to recognize opportunities to make a change. We need to make it okay for our male children to understand that female leadership is not threatening. In fact, female leadership in organizations, on the corporate boards, in executive management teams, at whatever level of management, always positively impacts the bottom line. Look at Rwanda, a model of development on the African continent. 35% of parliamentarians are women, 50% of ministers are women, and today Rwanda is an epitome of development on Human Development Index and indicators for the African continent. So I think really for the future, female leadership is absolutely key, and it's both an individual and collective responsibility. Thank you.